Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fit to Fat to Fit Experience podcast. So glad you guys tuned in for another episode here with me, Drew Manning from fit2fat2fit.com. It's always a pleasure to be doing this podcast, you guys. We've reached over 50 episodes. We're on episode 51, and we are well over 500,000, so 500,000 downloads, you guys. Thank you so much to you guys for listening, for sharing, for subscribing, and just for being cool and supporting me and us through this journey. It's been incredible. I'm so grateful to be able to do this podcast. Okay, so today's episode 51, is with Dr. Murdoch, and I'll introduce who he is in a little bit, but basically it's a great episode where we dive into actually my own personal results from a blood panel test that I did just recently. And he's going to go over them, what they mean, so you guys can kind of understand what's going on inside of my body, so that you can kind of understand, how diet and exercise affects that. Because, as you know, I've been doing a ketogenic diet for a while now, and I wanted to finally show you guys from a medical perspective what that does to the inside of your body, right? Physically, from an outside perspective, yes, I'm still staying lean. My performance is good. I've talked about the cognitive benefits, the mental clarity, the focus, the energy that I noticed being on a ketogenic diet. But it's time to put that to the test from a medical perspective and show the biomarkers of what's going on inside of my body. So Dr. Murdoch kind of does all that. We kind of also go into talking about, getting tested at home through Everlywell, which I'll talk about in a second. We talk about, certain blood panel tests like your cholesterol, your LDL, your HDL, triglycerides, vitamin D, HSCRP. We'll talk about all that stuff in depth, but the cool thing is that we talk about it on a very basic level so you at home can understand what all these numbers mean. So anyways, before we go into the episode, we have a new show sponsor, and I'm very, very excited to introduce you guys to everlywell.com. Now, everlywell.com, let me kind of give you a little bit of history of how I got connected with them. My brother that lives out in Texas met the CEO. He's like, you got to talk to this company. This is what they do. So basically, everlywell.com is a business that sends you specific tests, biomarker tests that you can do at home. So here's the thing. I've worked with doctors in the past, and I've got my blood tested during certain journeys that I've done in the past. And it's great because I think people need to understand how their diet, how their lifestyle affects themselves at the cellular level, right? What's going on inside. So that's why it's important to do these tests, but they can be expensive. It's time consuming. You got to go to your doctor. You got to make an appointment. You got to sit there for a while. And sometimes it's hard to understand what the tests mean. They give you a black and white printout, and sometimes they'll go over the test with you, but sometimes they'll just be like, well, you need to exercise more and eat less, right? That's kind of the general guidelines. Everlywell makes it so convenient and affordable for you to do all this at home. So basically, you go to their website, everlywell.com /fit2fat2fit, which, by the way, they created a specific URL for my followers to receive a 10% discount. And basically, you pick which test you want to do. They send you the test in the mail. You prick your finger. You drop some blood in there. You seal it up. You follow the instructions that are very clear and defined. And they give you a prepackaged UPS thing that you put it in there. You go drop it off at a UPS store, so it's no cost to you. You do it on your own time. You send it in within a week or so. You get pinged back, an email saying your results are in. You log into your account that you've created, and boom, your tests are there. It's super easy to understand, right? The way they display it, it's very easy to interpret, right? Your average person that knows nothing about health can understand what the test means, what the results are, how to improve those results, right? So they give you recommendations specifically of how to improve those results. So it kind of tells you how to fix the problem versus just, eating less and exercising more. It's always available to you, so your results are always there. You can go back in and log in, and it's shareable with others, you guys. And so you can share it with, family, friends, social media if you want to, which is what I plan on doing as well. And like I said, it's very affordable. It's very easy. So everlywell.com/fit to fat to fit, or use my code fit to fat to fit for a 10% off discount on any of their tests. And the test that I did, you guys, let me kind of tell you which ones I did, because I did 4 different ones. I did a cholesterol and lipids test, right, which goes over your total cholesterol, your HDL, LDL, triglycerides, hemoglobin, A1C. It's very basic, but it's very telling of how your diet and lifestyle affect that. And then the other test I did is a sleep and stress test, the thyroid and metabolism test, which tests your cortisol, your testosterone, and inflammation and vitamin D test. Those are the 4 tests that I did. You can, I'll probably share them on social media. You guys can check them out. But we go over those results here in this episode as well. So once again, very excited to introduce you guys to Everlywell. It's going to make blood testing so much easier, because here's the thing. If you're getting your oil changed more than you're getting your blood tested, that's a problem. You need to get your blood tested, I would say, once every 3 months, maybe 6 months max, to kind of see where you're at and make sure you're improving. So anyways, check out everlywell.com/fit to fat to fit. Use my discount code fit to fat to fit to get 10% off your first test. And let me know what you guys think of the process and what you guys think of Everlywell. If you guys like them, I like them, but let me know what you think. All right, you guys, let's go ahead and jump into our episode with Dr. Murdoch. But before we do, let me tell you a little bit about him. He's an active clinician, writer, has published several preventative health and wellness books, and has been featured on all the major networks, CNN, numerous radio shows, and he focuses on making complex health topics understandable. So you're going to love this episode, because you're going to understand, from a scientific perspective, what he's talking about. He is also the chief medical officer for Wellness FX and Everlywell as well. He's earned degrees in engineering and business from UCSD, UC Berkeley, Columbia, and he's been a leader and consultant in several health services and technology companies. So he definitely knows what he's talking about. Anyways, let's get to the episode. Enjoy it, learn from it, apply it, and thank you guys once again for tuning in. All right, what's up, Dr. Murdoch? How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Drew.
Yeah, welcome to the Fit to Fat to Fit Experience podcast. It's an honor to have you on, man.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
And so, where do you reside right now?
Well, I reside in New England. I live in Massachusetts, but I'm often
Did you grow up there?
The country, doing various work in preventative health and technology.
Yeah. Now, did you grow up there? Because I don't hear an accent.
I did grow up on the East Coast. I grew up a little south of me in Delaware, but then I got most of my education in California, so now I'm just a mix.
Okay. Yeah, no, I totally understand. I grew up half my life in San Diego, and then I moved to Northern Virginia area for the other half of my life. So same here. So before we get started, what did you have for breakfast? Can I ask that? I'm always curious to know.
Absolutely. Well, today I had basically a green smoothie today.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a mix of spinach, kale, had a little bit of fruit in it, a little bit of seaweed-based stuff like spirulina and chlorella. So a little bit of a mix.
Okay. Is that typical for you, or what's a typical breakfast for you?
I would say I have that most mornings. I just to get a nutrient boost, and while in general I don't consume a lot of carbohydrates, in the morning we tend to be the most insulin sensitive, and our glycogen stores are the lowest. So I figured if there was going to be a time I'd have a smoothie, that's when I would do it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the green smoothies. So let's, my audience might not know exactly who you are and what you do. I'd love for you to kind of, fill us in on how you grew up and where you grew up, and also, I know you studied to be an engineer, and how you became a doctor, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So I went going through school initially when I was young. I was the child of two engineers, and so I always had that math, science way of thinking in my brain. And when I went to college, I studied biomedical engineering. I actually went to the University of California, San Diego. So I've spent a fair amount of time in San Diego as well. And I studied bioengineering for a couple reasons. One, where I went to school, UC San Diego, was well known for its bioengineering program. But the other reason is, though I had this experience in engineering, I just always had a lot of interest in the human body and physiology. And I really enjoyed studying the human body from a mechanistic or engineering perspective, as bioengineering did. And so I did that through college. But I came to learn that I enjoyed what I enjoyed most about studying the body and looking at it from that engineering perspective was, like with a lot of engineering, how can you optimize the machine? How can you make the system function best? And that's really what medicine tries to do. So I decided to continue that bioengineering education in medicine. I actually stayed at the UC San Diego to study medicine, which was a great experience in that not only while I was there did I get to study medicine, but I also got to do a lot of research within medicine. Specifically, I became very interested in health prevention. There's one thing about curing a disease, but to me, if you can prevent a disease, that's even better than curing it, because not only have you made that disease go away, but it never even was an issue. And so I did a lot of research with various grants through fellowships and grants through medical school with the American Heart Association, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the Stein Institute of Research on Aging, the NIH, really focusing on how can we help prevent certain diseases as people get older. What the most common diseases, especially cardiovascular disease. And so it was really fascinating research, especially thinking about things like lipids and cholesterol and how to optimize those. Then I went on to train, do a residency after medical school. Specifically, I trained in emergency medicine. And though I love the specialty, because one aspect of emergency medicine is basically someone comes to you with a problem and you try to figure out how to fix it. You try to figure out how to optimize the situation. I found often the problems I was seeing were very late stage. And though I had done all this research about prevention and how to make diseases not happen, I was seeing people after they had their heart attacks or strokes, when it was, there was a lot less you could do compared to preventing disease. So I decided I wanted to get more involved in trying to help the society at large in prevention, or at least the spreading of health knowledge, so that people felt like they were more empowered to make personal health decisions that could help in their wellness and prevention of disease. So I started writing, and I've now written a few books in the area of what you can do to help optimize your health. Some focused on cardiovascular disease and cholesterol, others in overall health and wellness. But what I really think is a great tool now to try and spread prevention and help empower people in their health, kind of going back to my engineering roots, is health technology, and using modern tools that we've seen to really transform so many other industries, whether it be commerce or communication, and using that for health and spreading health information, helping people become more knowledgeable about their health. And I've worked with a few companies in that space now. I'm fortunate to be the chief medical officer now of a company called Everlywell that helps people do biomarker testing from the convenience of their own home. And that's really what interests me the most, because I've found biomarker testing to transform my own life and my own health by actually testing myself and finding what actions improve my health and what doesn't, that I've been really able to optimize my health in the way that I've always wanted ever since I went to college.
That's that's great, man. I appreciate you sharing your story with that. And we're going to get into Everlywell in just a second because I'm a huge fan, and I kind of want to go over my results with you because I just did my first test through Everlywell and kind of get your thoughts on my results. But do you, Murdoch, do you consider yourself a biohacker then, or what do you think? Would you consider yourself a biohacker when it comes to health, right?
That's a great question. And what I consider myself is someone that's responsive to feedback. And I don't necessarily need, I have found a ton of information to be able to make better decisions. I'll give you my personal example. I started testing my biomarkers I'd say a few years ago, and I wasn't doing it too frequently, once every, say, 6 months to a year. I know some people like to do it far more often, and there are plenty of other people that do it far less, or if at all. But I'd say every 6 months to a year I was testing, and what I found was at a certain period of my life, shortly after I went through my medical training and I was early in my career, when I was just working really hard, I thought I was a pretty healthy guy. I was eating what I thought was an okay diet. I tried to, not eat too much fat, and I'll get more into that in a sec. What I thought was the right way to eat, and I was a runner, and I thought I was taking good care of myself based on really the only data I had at the time, which was sort of the macro data of my weight. My weight wasn't too bad, so I figured I must be okay. But then as I started to check my numbers, I became concerned. My cholesterol progressively creeped up, and my blood sugar progressively was creeping up. My inflammatory markers weren't ideal. And that made me say, maybe I'm not working hard enough. So checking my biomarkers was a real wake-up call. I find a lot of people, including myself, who should know better than anybody, look at themselves and maybe just think they're doing okay, but when they check their biomarkers and actually see what's going on inside, they realize, okay, there may be some more issues. So it was a huge wake-up call to me. Really started motivating me even more than I thought I was. So I took what I thought was the right way and then took it to an extreme level. I said, okay, now I'm going to eat a really, really low-fat diet. And now I'm going to start, I was running 8 miles a day at that point. I mean, I was doing all the things that I thought was classically correct and just pursuing it to an extreme. And I kept testing to get that feedback again, maybe about 6 months later. And what I found, which surprised me, is not only were a lot of my markers not getting better, but a lot of them were getting worse. And so as we became more, this was right around the time that we were starting to become more aware in the last few years that maybe it's not about the length that you train, but about the quality of your training, and maybe trading some of that long distance running I was doing with some shorter high intensity workouts and muscle building workouts might optimize my biomarkers and health further. We're starting to learn that maybe it's not about strict low-fat diets, but instead about eating healthy fats and not substituting. A lot of people, when they eat low-fat diets, tend to eat a lot more carbohydrates. Now we're learning that having an excess amount of carbohydrates in the diet comes with their own problems. So maybe instead of being low-fat, high-carb, being healthier fats and a lesser amount of healthier carbohydrates. And my point is not to get too caught up in that specific methodology or science of this is how you should work out and this is how you should eat. My point is, through getting the feedback, I learned to make adjustments. And so when I made those adjustments in my exercise regime and in my diet, I'll tell you, Drew, the impact was huge. My triglycerides dropped by more than half. My HDL cholesterol significantly increased. My blood sugar dropped dramatically. One of my favorite measures, the triglycerides to HDL ratio, which basically looks at a balance of the fats in the blood that can deposit in your arteries and cause contribute to cardiovascular disease versus HDL cholesterol, which can help take away some of those deposits, my triglycerides to HDL ratio dropped by 2/3, not to 2/3 of what it was, but by 2/3 through making some of these changes. And here I was, a pretty knowledgeable and what I thought motivated guys. So if it could have that sort of impact on me, I think that testing can have a tremendous impact for others.
Yeah, wow, that is so powerful. Honestly, that really is, because I remember when I was doing my Fit to Fat to Fit journey, that was really the first time I was doing consistent, biomarker testing with my doctor, just to make sure I wasn't going to die, right? As I was gaining all this weight and no exercise for 6 months, which was scary. But I remember going on the Dr. Oz show for the first time, and I was like his little guinea pig because he was so intrigued by what I was doing. And here I was, 31 years old at the time. I've been healthy and fit my entire life, 30 plus years, healthy, fit. I played sports growing up. And then in just 6 months' time, it was crazy to see how quickly my health declined, right? From a medical perspective. I'm not talking about my weight. Yes, I had man boobs and a big gut, and I felt that weight, but I didn't feel like I was dying, right? Like I would drink Mountain Dew, I would have Cinnamon Toast Crunch, it tasted good. I didn't feel my liver and my kidneys hurting as I was doing that, right? Or I didn't feel the cholesterol building up. I felt, I'm like, I'm still alive. I can walk upstairs. I'm good. I think a lot of Americans think that way. They think, I'm still, they look in the mirror, they get on the scale, they're like, yeah, I'm not too bad, right? I'm not morbidly obese, but it's really about what's going on the inside of your body. And until you know that, until you know what's going on the inside of your body, you don't really know what changes to make. And that's what the wake-up call even for me as a personal trainer. I was working in the medical field at the time with a lot of doctors and nurses, so I understood the risks going into this journey. But it wasn't until I was on the Dr. Oz show and I realized I developed a non-alcoholic fatty liver in 6 months' time, and my blood pressure was through the roof, and everything. All my biomarkers were really unhealthy. That's when it gets scary, right? Because people don't realize it sneaks up on them. And like you were saying, working in the hospital emergency rooms, like it's over time, and all of a sudden, boom, something happens. Then they go for help, right? Instead of preventing it. So I can totally relate to what you're talking about. And I think it's very important for people to understand that it's up to them, really, honestly, to, start tracking instead of just their weight, these biomarkers. And that's why I love companies like Everlywell and, Wellness FX that make it so much easier and more convenient for people. Because, and I'll ask your opinion on this, but I think people's perception of it is like, oh, it's too inconvenient. I got to take off work. I got to make an appointment with a doctor, wait around for an hour, do the test, and then 6 weeks later or whatever, then I get the results, and, the doctor just says you need to eat less and exercise more. So what's your opinion on why you think people don't, take the time to test themselves on these biomarkers from what you've seen?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that it is, for most people, it has been very inconvenient. I mean, the classic system to understand your health for prevention is you take time off work, you go see your doctor, you wait however long for a very brief visit, who they order the blood tests, and it varies by physician and what tests might be ordered, and then you have to then go to a lab, get your blood drawn, then wait a certain amount of time, go back to see your doctor. Your results get communicated to you, usually in a black and white printout that you don't really understand. Like you said, the recommendations, because you have that limited amount of time, are pretty general in terms of, eat better, exercise more, and so that is absolutely not an ideal system. And what companies like Everly try to do is completely change that paradigm by making it all as convenient as possible for you, so you don't have to lose that time that you had to lose before. And then you can then focus that time on really understanding your markers and getting into the kind of details that I think a lot of people want or need to try to really optimize those biomarkers.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I think that's where we're moving towards, right? Making it more convenient. I think people are understanding, the importance of, or the convenience of becoming a biohacker in a way where it's like, okay, I want these results. I want to find out what's going on inside of me, but I want it to be done quickly, conveniently, to where I don't have to take time out of my day. And sometimes the costs, I've done some of these tests in the past, and they can be expensive. I remember, for a very extensive blood panel, it was like $8,000, $9,000, right? I mean, it's extremely expensive for some people, right? And that depends on insurance and things like that. But that's why I think, Everlywell does, makes it more convenient for people to just do it from home, so they don't have to make any doctor appointments. But speaking of that, I would love, if you're okay with it, going over my results. So just to update my audience, I ordered some tests from Everlywell. You do them, they send you the tests to your house, right? And there's very detailed instructions on how to do the tests. Basically, prick your finger and you drop the blood in there and you send it off, and it's super convenient, super easy. So I did my tests. I did, let's see, let me pull it up, which tests I did. And then I'll have Murdock, if you don't mind, kind of going over those test results. So he has them. And that's what's great about it is, we can go over them to understand exactly what they're going through, or to understand exactly what these tests mean. So I did a cholesterol and lipids test, and a sleep and stress test, thyroid and metabolism, and inflammation and vitamin D test. So I did those 4 tests. So let's maybe just start out with the cholesterol and lipids, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So, yes, I've had a chance to review your results, and I'll get into some of the details. Overall, I mean, they're really fantastic. Looking at your cholesterol, we tend to look deeper than total cholesterol, but specifically different components of cholesterol. There's the LDL cholesterol, or low-density lipoprotein. That's the type of cholesterol particle that tends to deposit in our arteries, causing clogging, a process known as atherosclerosis, which can contribute to cardiovascular disease. So the less of that LDL cholesterol you have, that's been associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. Your LDL levels were fantastic. They were 77.9 specifically, well less than the recommended levels. I mean, very significantly high is considered 160. Yours is less than half of that. Some people who have health problems, like say they're diabetics, they recommend to get LDL levels even lower than that, say under 100. Yours are already under 100, so your levels are outstanding. Then another component of cholesterol is your HDL, or high-density lipoprotein. This is actually a healthier type of cholesterol, and not everyone realizes that some types of cholesterol are actually good for you. This high-density lipoprotein helps carry lipids away from the blood vessels. It actually acts like an artery clearing device. You can actually clean your blood vessels, and this HDL helps do it. It's recommended that your HDL be over 40. If your HDL gets under 40, then that's considered a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, because you don't have as much of these particles clearing your blood vessels. Yours is over 50. It's 52.6, which is good. And I think there's some people like even higher levels. I'll get into in a minute why I think your levels are pretty great. And before that, I just want to talk about your triglycerides. Now, triglycerides are basically fats, so fats in the blood. So the more fats you have in the blood, the more they can deposit in blood vessels, contributing to this atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. There are different guidelines for levels of fats in the blood. Most recommend having it under 150. Some people who are really, really aggressive like to see triglycerides under 100. Yours are 71.6, which is outstanding. It's definitely a great triglycerides level. So, I mentioned your HDL before. What a lot of people really care about is the balance between HDL and triglycerides, because you have triglycerides that deposit in blood vessels and HDL that helps clear those fats from your blood vessels. So it's the balance of the two that's really key. So a very popular marker, and probably the lipid marker that's most closely associated with cardiovascular disease, is your triglycerides to HDL ratio. So basically the level of your triglycerides over the level of your HDL cholesterol. And it's considered high risk if you're over, say, 4 to 5 on this ratio. So if your amount of triglycerides is 4 to 5 times your amount of HDL, most want to see you under 2 is as really an optimal threshold. Your ratio is 1.36, which is fantastic. So the balance is pretty great between your triglycerides and HDL, and that speaks highly to what you're doing fitness wise and what you're doing diet wise. I think one thing I've noticed diet wise that may be a contributor to this is we check some other markers in the cholesterol and lipid panel. We check some markers of inflammation, which we can talk to in a bit when we review some of your other tests. But another marker we check in the cholesterol and lipid panel is your hemoglobin A1C, which represents your average blood sugar over the preceding few months. And we check this because a lot of people will check a single fasting blood sugar level, and while that's definitely a good test, it's prone to some error. Like if you've, say, had some activity that morning, or you haven't slept well the night before, or if you have some sudden stress, that can acutely increase your blood sugar. And so that can create some variance in the test that day. The nice thing about your hemoglobin A1C is you remove some of that variance, and the way that test works is blood sugar actually deposits on your red blood cells and on your hemoglobin particles, the oxygen-carrying component of red blood cells. And the more sugar you have in your blood, the more of those deposits we see. So what we can do is measure the amount of those deposits. Now, your red blood cells, they recycle constantly. They break down and new ones are made to a point where all of your blood is recycled roughly every 4 months, roughly every 120 days. So when we check your hemoglobin A1C, that represents your average blood sugar over the last 120 days, over the last 4 months, and it gives us a good idea of where you've been at blood sugar-wise. Looking at your hemoglobin A1C, so generally it's recommended you want to be under 6 or the low 6s. That starts to get into concern for diabetes, pre-diabetes in the high 5s. Yours is not just below that, but well under 5. It's 4.6%. Which is an outstanding hemoglobin A1C. I've looked at a lot of these, and this is definitely in the probably top 5% of hemoglobin A1Cs that I see. Not many people get it this low. And what that tells me is you probably, in addition to generally having an insulin-sensitive body where you have a lot of muscle that makes you insulin-sensitive and not a lot of fat, which can make you insulin-resistant, so that being resistant to insulin can raise your blood sugar. Being sensitive to insulin can lower your blood sugar. So that tells me that you have a lot of muscle compared to your fat, but it also tells me you probably don't have a lot of carbohydrates in your diet. Is that suspicion right?
Yeah, no, I've been, very low carbs. I've been doing, not a strict keto diet, but fairly strict where, most of the time I'm doing a ketogenic diet. So like 70% fat, 70% fat, 20% protein, maybe 10% carbs, sometimes less.
So the interesting thing about that is not only do I think that's influencing your hemoglobin A1C percentage and your relatively low blood sugar, but I also think that's a big influence of your triglycerides, the fats in the blood. Now, for a long time, people assumed because triglycerides are fats in the blood, they're primarily influenced by dietary fat. So the more fat you eat, the higher your triglycerides. That's not what we've found over the last few years. We've actually found that carbohydrates, especially simple carbohydrates like sugar, are a much bigger influence of the triglycerides in your blood. So I believe it's that diet that's causing your low triglycerides as well, and why you have both a low triglycerides and a low hemoglobin A1C.
Yeah, it's funny because I get that all the time too, and I think it's still I mean, it makes people so nervous. You're like, they're asking me what I eat. I'm like, look, I eat a lot of fat. Now they're healthier fats, but it's without the presence of, refined sugars and processed carbohydrates. But it still scares people when I tell them I eat butter and coconut oil and avocados and whole eggs and, sometimes bacon, but fattier cuts of meat, and they're like, I'm scared to do that because we've been so, taught, like ingrained in our heads that fat is the enemy. So it's interesting, but that's why I wanted to go over these results with you, is to show people, look, fat is not the enemy. It's the processed carbs like I ate when I was doing my Fit to Fat to Fit journey. Cinnamon Toast Crunch twice a day, 2 or 3 Mountain Dews, white pasta, white bread, granola bars, chips, cookies, crackers, even if they're low fat, even if they're all natural or gluten free or fortified with vitamin A and vitamin D, that doesn't mean that they're healthy for you. And it's just, we're slowly starting to get people to understand that, but it's, I think it's an uphill battle still.
Absolutely. Fats are becoming not only not the enemy, but many types of fats are becoming our friend, especially unsaturated fats, like the avocados, like in nuts, seeds, certain oils, because they can not just help it overall by reducing carbohydrates, but fats directly, like unsaturated fats, can help increase your HDL cholesterol and lower LDL cholesterol, especially unsaturated fats helping increase your HDL, which can offer you more protection and more advantage from cardiovascular disease.
Yeah. Well, so cool. So my hemoglobin A1C, I don't think we've talked about my HSCRP yet, but I'm assuming we'll get there. But I think it's awesome to look at these results and to have them in front of you. And here's the thing that I like about Everly Well. I'm not going to pitch it a ton, but basically it tells you exactly. It's so easy to read. Like the most uneducated person when it comes to health can understand what these results mean, what you can do about it to improve those numbers. And there's even a community you can join, and you can even consult with a physician, which is awesome because it makes it a little bit more personable if you can talk with someone about these results. But for the most part, your average person is going to be able to get these results online, and understand exactly what's going on inside their body.
Exactly. That's why I'm a fan of getting tested too.
Exactly. Okay, let's go over some of the other tests if you want to. So we did the cholesterol and lipids, so I'm pretty much good there. I mean, I've had my HDL over 60 at certain points in time, and I know I can get it back there, but I'm not too concerned about it, like you said, because my triglyceride to HDL ratio is pretty good.
Exactly. The more focusing on unsaturated fats, the more you can potentially improve that HDL. But because you have such a nice balance of your triglycerides to HDL, it's just not that emergent an issue.
Yeah. Let's talk about inflammation and vitamin D, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So this is one of my favorite tests because not a lot of people know about inflammation. And what inflammation is our bodies all have an inflammatory response to various offenders. The simplest example I give is if you think about it, if you twist your ankle, you sprain your ankle gets swollen and red and hot. And what that is your body senses an injury and it sends certain chemicals to that site of injury to start to facilitate healing. You also get that when you say come down with a virus and your glands get swollen. That's really an inflammatory response of your body trying to respond to the initial infection. And that's a healthy response. That does good things for us. When it becomes unhealthy is when there's persistent chronic inflammation, and that's unhealthy for a couple reasons. One, it can tell us that, hey, maybe there's something bad going on in our body. So an elevated level of inflammation can act as a red flag. Like there's something going on that my body's responding to. But then it also can actually cause damage itself. For example, when blood vessels get damaged, through this progressive atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease from deposits in our blood vessels, that'll increase inflammation. And so measures of inflammation are associated with risks of diseases like cardiovascular disease. But then also, when the body senses that damage to blood vessels, it sends those chemicals, those inflammatory mediators, to try to help. But what that can do is that can actually cause more clogging in our blood vessels and increase the risks and potential damage. So it can be both a sign of issues, but also cause issues. So if you're able to optimize inflammation, you can reduce your risk of many types of diseases. In fact, inflammation has been associated with a whole host of diseases, not limited to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, even many types of cancers. So inflammation is becoming increasingly important in terms of medicine and understanding what risks exist. Now, the measure of inflammation that's one of the most popular and very, very commonly tested is the HSCRP, which stands for high sensitivity C-reactive protein. It's a really good measure of short-term inflammation. You got an inflammation kit done, which examines HSCRP. That marker is actually in the cholesterol and lipid panel as well. So you actually had it checked a couple times, and both times it was the same number. It was where you want to be is that what's considered elevated risk is once you start getting into over a level of 1 and high risk over a level of 3. And I've seen people with levels in the 20, 30, 40. In fact, in my clinical practice, even in the emergency room, we check CRPs. And if they're really high, that often tells us something. Not only is something bad going on, but something really bad might happen really quickly. Often tells us about the urgency of the illness. Specifically with you, your inflammation levels, your HSCRP levels were under 1. They were 0.7, which are great levels. That's where you want to be, and so that's fantastic. Looking at the rest of your panel, you also had checked in the inflammation panel your vitamin D. The reason those two are checked in the inflammation panel is it's become increasingly aware that vitamin D deficiency is associated with inflammation. More globally, we've become aware over the last decade or so that vitamin D deficiency has become a risk for a whole host of diseases. Part of the reason that is vitamin D deficiency. Vitamin D is considered the sunshine vitamin. Our primary source of vitamin D historically has been from the sun, and when the sun hits our skin, it causes a chemical reaction, creating the production of vitamin D within our cells. We don't get nearly as much sun as we used to historically. We spend a lot more time indoors. And so vitamin D levels for society overall have gone progressively down, and now it's estimated that a huge majority of society is vitamin D insufficient or deficient. And that's really unfortunate because vitamin D serves a whole host of functions in our body, specifically in how many genes are expressed, or how genes are expressed, including genes that govern our immune functioning, genes that influence inflammation. And so vitamin D deficiency has been associated with increased inflammation as well as a host of other diseases, including all those diseases I mentioned that are associated with inflammation. So vitamin D deficiency has been associated with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, many types of cancers, depression, and the list goes on and on. When I look at your vitamin D levels, it's recommended that vitamin D levels be over 30. And when you get less than 30, they're considered insufficient. When you get less than 20, really be considered deficient. You're slightly over 20, 21.5. So they're not in that major deficiency in that I've seen a lot of people with vitamin D levels in the single digits. and you're definitely not there. But I don't think it's optimal as well. And part of the reason for that might be, for a lot of people, vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, and a lot of people store vitamin D in their fat. You're a guy with just not a lot of body fat, so you're not going to store as much vitamin D as some people, and so that it's going to be valuable to continue to get vitamin D from various sources, whether that be getting some outdoor exposure, especially during those peak hours in the early afternoon. But we know sun exposure can have certain risks as well. So other sources of vitamin D can be helpful as well, whether it be vitamin D containing foods like a lot of meats, poultry, dairy tends to be fortified with vitamin D. Fish has a lot of vitamin D. But more and more we're seeing supplementation. I take a vitamin D supplement every single day. And the powerful thing about improving vitamin D levels is you start to see improvements in other markers as well. For example, with your HSCRP, though it's at great levels, being under 1, 0.7, there's still further room for improvement. And I am fairly confident that if you can get your vitamin D levels a little bit higher, you're going to see your HSCRP levels, your inflammation levels, go down even further.
Yeah.
And
so that's a quick question. Sorry to interrupt you, because I think this is great for people to understand that if they see themselves deficient in vitamin D, it's like, okay, more is better, but it's only with vitamin D, it's a U-shaped curve, so it's only to a certain extent, right? It's not like, okay, I need to stay out in the sun for hours and take 20,000 IU of vitamin D to get that number up. You don't want to have it too high, because then that's where you need to check your HSCRP at the same time to kind of see what's the optimal range. And I'm assuming you've seen that in your practice, where you've seen people maybe overdo it, and then their inflammation, it tends to go up as well if they have too much. So they got to find their optimal range. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. We became increasingly aware of all of the risks of vitamin D deficiency, that a lot of practitioners started pushing more vitamin D, more vitamin D, more vitamin D. And you're right, some people would get to really high levels, and there's actually now been some research over the last few years from institutions like Johns Hopkins and others that have shown excessively high vitamin D levels. Once you start approaching triple digits, or at least the high double digits, can actually come with more health risks and increase inflammation. So like you described, it's that U-shaped curve of there's a certain vitamin D range that's ideal, and that range might vary a little bit by person, especially because if you think about historically, if we come from different ethnic backgrounds, certain cultures may have come from places that there was a lot of sun exposure evolutionarily, while certain other places, there may be not as much sun in their climate. So every individual is a little bit different here. So what I recommend, and I see a lot of people do, is retest. A lot of people don't know how much vitamin D should I take. I suggest, well, start at a certain level and retest both your vitamin D and your inflammation levels and see where you're at. For most people, that ideal range tends to be in that 40 to 50 zone, and that's where I tend to see the lowest HSCRPs.
Okay. That's awesome. So that's what I was going to ask you is, how often should people be testing? Maybe not just this test, but in general. I mean, is it every 30 days, every 60 days, once every 6 months? What's optimal for people, or what would you recommend from your perspective?
Absolutely. I think the more abnormal or the more high risk your markers are, the more often you should test. If you find that you have absolutely no abnormalities, nothing you're looking to adjust, well, that suggests you're probably doing things pretty well and can maintain that. And then I'd say annually is a pretty good interval of time to make sure that your maintenance is doing well. For people with significant abnormalities, and they're really looking to make some major changes, what you want to know, and you want to know pretty quickly, is if those changes are actually having their intended effect. And that's where that feedback is so important. And I'd say roughly every 3 months, because after about 90 days, you should start to see changes in your lipids and blood sugar and inflammation levels and vitamin D. And so 3 months is a pretty good interval if you're making significant changes.
Yeah, and I think that's what's great for other people to learn, and I kind of preach this, is to become, I tell people to become your own self-experimentation, right? Experiment on yourself and see what works best for you, because what works best for you might not be the best for everybody else. So just because it works for someone else doesn't mean it's going to work for you, and vice versa. So that's what I tell people, if you're going to, let's say, for example, try the keto diet, right? That's kind of been a hot topic recently. If you're going to try it, then, you got to do it more than just 3 or 4 days. You got to stick to it for, I would say, at least 4 to 6 weeks. Get your blood tested as well to see if that's optimal for you. If not, then, you tried it, but you got to at least, give it at least, I would say, 4 weeks, but I think 90 days would be optimal for people to try any kind of new lifestyle, whether it's, they start a new workout program or they start a new diet, and kind of just do your own self-experimentation to find what works best for you, because I think so many times we kind of just go by the seat of our pants and say, okay, well, I see this celebrity's doing this diet, so I'm going to try that. Oh, I feel horrible, after a few days, so, let me go back to my my Cinnamon Toast Crunch and Mountain Dew diet. That's what I used to eat as well. But anyways, I think that's great advice, and hopefully people that are listening can kind of take hold of that and apply it in their lives and start to become more responsible when it comes to testing their own biomarkers. And you can't always, and I hate to say this, and you probably see this all the time, but you can't always just rely on your doctor to tell you exactly what to do. Sometimes you have to know what works best for you, because your doctor's seeing X amount of people per day, X amount of people per week, and they don't always have the best advice when it comes to nutrition sometimes, or lifestyle changes. Do you think that's correct? Do you think, that's from your perspective as a doctor?
It's funny how...
Or is that too harsh? Sorry if that's offensive.
It's interesting how I've went through all these years of education, after college, then 4 years of medical school, then another 3 years of training, and how little education I got in nutrition or physical fitness. In fact, I don't recall a class that I had in either topic. Maybe some stuff would get mentioned at some point, but it wasn't enough that I really got a lot from that in terms of recommendations I could make to patients. And that's why I was still in that classic, just sort of general thinking of low fat and more exercise, rather than thinking about really the quality of what you eat, that it's not just fat's bad and carbohydrates instead, that it's not just more exercise is better. That was stuff I had to figure out on my own based on the most recent research and testing myself. So I definitely agree that a lot of the nutrition information that's cutting edge, that we're learning through research or learning through this personalized feedback, hasn't necessarily yet diffused out to general medicine yet.
Yeah, and I think that's super interesting, because you, as a doctor, you're having to find what works best for you and experiment on yourself. And that's kind of what I was going to ask you, since we're coming up on time here. A few last questions that I have for you is what self-experimentations have you done on yourself, and what have you found that works optimally for you based on your biomarkers that you've tested, and specifically, nutrition and exercise? What routine have you found is optimal for you?
So for me, I have found that I used to do a lot of long distance running, and I don't do as much of that anymore. I do instead more shorter, high intensity interval training with some weights as well, really focusing then on trying to build more muscle, because I find that building more muscle has improved my metabolism, which has improved my burning of fat. In terms of my diet, I have focused more on, rather than from a macro perspective trying to go really low fat, I instead try to eat more healthful foods, more pro-nutrient foods. So I eat more healthy fats. I eat a lot of unsaturated fats, so nuts, avocados, oils, seeds. I still get some carbohydrates, but definitely a lot less than I was when I was eating a low-fat diet. And again, I really focus on it being the most healthful type. So most carbohydrates that I tend to get tend to be from produce, whether it be a little bit from vegetables, and I have some fruit, like some berries, which come with a lot of other nutrients. And then finally, I supplement. I take a vitamin D supplement almost daily, just because I don't get a ton of sun exposure, especially living here in New England. And I take a probiotic every day. And doing that just because another sort of evolutionary change is we're a lot cleaner as a society, and that's a good thing. But we don't get exposed to necessarily the same bacterial milieu that we used to be. And so, we have a lot of good bacteria that live in our gut, and I just try to help maintain that good bacteria with a daily probiotic. And so those are the basics way I live now, and I continue to test and get feedback to make sure that's an optimal way of living in terms of my biomarkers. And I would say it's definitely paid off for my biomarkers. I feel healthy. I feel well. I'm very active. I have a lot of energy. I don't get sick often. I've even seen positive influences in terms of my mood and stress. And so I think really optimizing a lot of these markers, vitamin D, inflammation, lipids, etc., can impact many aspects of your life. Most centrally, your health.
Yeah, yeah. I tell people all the time, no matter what diet protocol they're following, whether it's vegan or paleo or keto, no matter what, there's two things they need to consider. One is nutrient density, in my opinion, right? Making sure that whichever diet they're following is very nutrient dense, so a lot of micronutrients in their diet, and then also their glycemic load, right? A low glycemic load tends to be better for most people in our society, in my opinion. So that's kind of the two things I tell people to consider. Is like, just because you're eating vegan or just because you're eating paleo doesn't automatically mean that you're healthy, right? I think those two things, if they look at those two things, nutrient density and low glycemic load, they can kind of say, okay, I'm on the right path, no matter what diet protocol. Because I'm sure you've seen it. There's a right way and a wrong way to do almost every fad diet out there, right? Whether it's a paleo or vegan or keto, it doesn't matter. There's an unhealthy way of doing it, and there's a healthier version of doing it. And I kind of try and teach people that, and kind of show both sides of like, even gluten-free, like there's a very unhealthy way to do a gluten-free diet. Just go to the grocery store and you'll see all these gluten-free cereals and breads and pastas and pizzas and all these processed foods, but that doesn't mean that you're becoming healthier just because it's gluten-free. But anyways, kind of getting back to your supplements, you said you take a vitamin D3 and a probiotic. Any specific brands? I'm just curious which ones you recommend.
I specifically take a Thorne brand supplement, just because Thorne Research has a great reputation for having high quality supplements.
That's THORN.
THORNE.
Okay.
That's specifically what I take.
Okay, gotcha. Any other supplements that you take? Do you take any protein powders or multivitamins, or is it just those two?
I take a daily multivitamin as well, with a lot of B vitamins, and because, like you said, you want to try and pack your diet with micronutrients, but sometimes you don't necessarily know that on certain days you're getting all the micronutrients that you like, and I guess I err on the side of caution by taking a multivitamin.
Gotcha. Okay. No, I'm always curious to know what other people are taking and how often and things like that. But okay, we're coming up on time here, Murdock, but I appreciate you coming on. Really quick before we sign off, though, where can people get a hold of you if they want to ask you questions, or social media, your website, all your books? We'll put all that in the show notes.
Absolutely. So I think the easiest way to get hold of me is through Everlywell. When I get questions all the time through the company because, I'm really here to support anyone I work with. And so when Everlywell customers ask medical questions, they get sent to me and I offer answers. And so through Everlywell is probably going to be the easiest way.
Okay, so everlywell.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there's a contact button, I'm assuming.
Exactly.
Somewhere on there. Okay, gotcha. Okay, one last question before we go, and then I'll let you go, Murdock, I promise. So obviously, I did, Fit to Fat to Fit years ago, and now there's a TV show where other trainers are doing what I did for 4 months, so it's not a long period of time, and they're monitored by a doctor throughout. But the whole purpose of it is for them to gain some empathy, some understanding, some respect. Now, you as a doctor, would you ever consider doing something like this to better understand your patients?
Hey, it definitely sounds interesting. I'd be delighted to explore it further.
Okay, so you're saying you would do a Fit to Fat to Fit journey? No, I'm not being serious, but I don't know. Do you think you could do it? Like, maybe just theoretically, do you think you could do that for 4 or 6 months, no exercise, eat a standard American diet, and then lose the weight? Do you think you could do something like that?
So do I think I have the capability? I think I have the capability. Uh-huh. Do I desire to make myself more unhealthy for an extended period of time? Honestly, I don't.
Come on, there's got to be at least one food out there that's like your temptation, that you would love to just, indulge in. If so, what is that food?
Oh yeah, there's so many temptations out there. I mean, I'm a big fan of buffalo chicken.
Oh yeah.
Would I do that exclusively for 4 to 6 months? I think that'd be challenging for me. But yes, I definitely have temptations as well.
Some wings, huh?
Yeah.
What's so interesting is the trainers on the show. So we're filming season 2 right now, and we're about 6 weeks into it. It's funny to see these trainers, and I went through the same thing. Of these trainers, they're so excited for the first week or two. They're like, oh my gosh, I can eat whatever I want to, like it's food freedom, and they just kind of go after it, and the food tastes really good, and they still feel somewhat healthy, but man, so quickly within 2 to 4 weeks, I would say, they start to realize, oh my gosh, like this is way harder than I thought. They feel so unhealthy, and then they're like, man, I still have 3 more months of this, and that's where it gets really hard, because their eyes are kind of bigger than their stomach, and they're like, oh, this is going to be fun. And I went through that too. It's fun for a minute, but when your health goes away, and it goes away so quickly, right? Yep. You don't realize how quickly it can go away. It goes away so quickly. You start to realize, man, this is way harder than I thought. And it kind of, I'm not saying people, the trainers on the show or me, myself, understand exactly what their clients are going through, but at least they can come out of it and have a better understanding from a mental, emotional, and physical perspective versus before. Because I grew up my entire life in shape. I've never been overweight, and same thing with the trainers on the show is they've never seen what it's like on the other side. And so, anyways, don't worry, I'm not going to hold you to that. I asked Dr. Oz the same question. I was like, would you ever do this? He's like, no way. So, yeah. But anyways, Murdoch, thank you so much for coming on. I learned a ton from this, and I know, and my hope is that my, people listening learned a ton from this as well. But thank you once again for coming on, and I might have to have you back on in the future.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Okay. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Drew.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another great episode on the Fit to Fat to Fit Experience podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Murdoch Kalegi. You can get a hold of him through everlywell.com with all your medical questions. If you have questions about the testing or your results, you can contact them through there. Once again, definitely check out everlywell.com/fit to fat to fit, or use my code Fit to Fat to Fit for 10% off your testing. Become your own self-experimentation, you guys. It's very important that you understand what's going on the inside of your body, right? The scale can't tell you if you're becoming healthier from a medical perspective, but getting these biomarkers tested through a company like everlywell.com, or you can go to your doctor as well, but I just recommend you become your own self-experimentation. Find what's optimal for you, right? Is the keto diet, the vegan diet, the paleo diet best for you? Is Zumba, is CrossFit, is endurance running, is high-intensity interval training best for you? the only way to find out is by getting these biomarkers, right? You can't just go off of weight and body composition. There's way more to it than that. So check out everlywell.com/fit2fit or use my discount code fit2fit. Follow me on social media, you guys, if you guys want to reach out to me with suggestions for the show, or you just want to say what's up. All my social media handles are at fit2fit. My website is at fit2fit.com. Sign up for my newsletter, you guys, so you can stay in the know of what's going on in my life and upcoming events. And once again, I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming here, listening to this podcast, sharing it with others. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes to the podcast. Leave a comment, if you will. That helps with my rankings. And share it with friends and family. And I appreciate you guys. We'll see you guys back here next week.